Nice little group here, and I am just very, very grateful. I guess I could take these off, huh? I'm grateful that you're here tonight, and I personally believe, as you do too, that we are living in unprecedented times, right? Amen? I mean, the world is changing drastically. The human spirit and psyche and emotions and all, it's like humanity is at a weird place right now. I think weird is kind of the word I say. But Christ came to this earth to save us, to install in us a new way, a new perspective of living and thought. And he told us he's going to come back, and he left us his spirit. And he told us that the church is going to do great things before he returns. And there's going to be a harvest. And all the things that you know, I could just keep preaching. But I believe that what we're doing here tonight is a part of the prophetic word, right? We have made ourselves available to the Lord's Spirit. We've got ourselves here. Andy, Rob, and Tim have come to share with us and inspire us and give us data. And so I just say thank you for being here. May you and I not take this moment lightly. And as we talk tonight and learn and grow over this weekend, it's my prayer that this time will bear fruit, right? We're going to be inspired, and the seeds that are sown tonight and the seeds that we've been praying and asking the Lord to bless, I do believe that there will be fruit harvested because of our efforts, because of tonight and as we continue. So may we continue. I'm going to pray and then give the time over here to these guys and let them lead us. So let's pray together. Father, we thank you for your word. Your word is the foundation of all things. You created all this from your word through you. And Jesus, you came as a man. Lord, the word became flesh. So, Lord, I pray tonight that you again, as I just even say these things, you would again, your word would be made flesh in us, Lord. Send us your word and send us your spirit. Inspire us. And, Lord, may we take and may we value the role that we have to possibly save 1, 2, 3, 4, many hundreds. I don't know how many people that we could influence for your kingdom's sake, Lord, but we are willing. We're here tonight. And so we pray that as we join our efforts together, that you would bring fruit in our lives and in our church. And we thank you. Give this time to you. Bless Tim, Rob, and Andy now as they lead us, and we just give this whole time, this weekend to you, and we praise you, Jesus. We look forward to seeing what you do. In your name, amen. All right, guys, Tim, come on up. Thank you. Why don't we give him a round of applause? Say thank you for being here. Yes.
Test. Does this one work? There we go. Okay. Maybe I'll start out with this and see if the other one starts working. Well, good evening. It is so good to see all of you, and I enjoy getting to know a few of you over the meal that we had together. Checking. My name is Tim Taylor, and this is Andy Villanueva and Rob Zama, and we are the Outreach Ministries team of the Oregon Conference. And we are so delighted to be with you this weekend, and we are so excited that you have made it a priority in your schedule to come out and to be part of this experience and this journey. So we want to welcome you to the EvangeLive START weekend. Well, what does that mean? Maybe if you saw this in the brochure or a handout, you're wondering, well, what is this weekend going to be all about? We are excited to share with you. So the concept of EvangeLive is this concept that evangelism, which, by the way, we're all very excited and passionate about, evangelism really should not just be something that we do, but it should be part of who we are, right? And so it's really about finding the value in Jesus. As you can see there in that emblem, we believe that when Jesus is at the center of your church, when Jesus is at the center of your life, that is where transformation will take place. That is where true value is found, in Jesus. And so we are very excited because we believe that every church and every member is called to actively share Jesus with others in some way or another. And so we are here to hopefully help spread that passion and that fire that we have in our hearts. And we hope that if you already have that passion, that it will grow even more this weekend. And if you don't have it, we hope that you'll catch it because it's very exciting. So there are a lot of different things we're going to be looking at, many different topics this weekend, but we've called it a START weekend, which is an acronym for Strategic Training and Revitalization Tour. Well, what does that mean? What is that all about? Well, we're hoping that this weekend will be a time of refreshing and renewal for you spiritually, as well as some training on how to more effectively share Jesus with others. And so that is the goal of this weekend. And the word START is also significant because we're hoping that this journey, this weekend, can help you and your church to have a jump start in the next chapter of your journey as you look at how you can effectively reach others with the good news of the gospel and with Jesus. And so the last word there you can see on the slide says tour. And so we are actually doing a pilot this weekend with this START weekend. So congratulations, you're part of the very first START weekend. And so we have invited this whole area to come together, or at least a few key leaders from the surrounding churches to join us. And so that's why you see it says there, the Central Valley region. How many of you knew that you were part of the Central Valley region? Okay, I'm always curious. Okay, a few hands went up, and that's okay. So this is a relatively new thing from what I understand, and that is that the Oregon Conference has taken a look at all the churches that we have and have divided them up into regions. Does anyone know how many churches there are in the Oregon Conference, roughly? Any guesses, maybe? What's that? 100? That's a good guess. Anyone else? 99, okay. We have a 170 churches, roughly, in the Oregon Conference. The Oregon Conference is the largest conference in the North Pacific Union. And so the Outreach Ministries Department, we serve roughly around 130 to 140 of those churches, which is mostly the non-Hispanic churches. We also have the Hispanic Ministries Department in the Oregon Conference that serves the Hispanic churches. And so this map that you see here is all the churches, and you can see we've color-coded it based on the region that those churches are in. And so you can see on the screen there that yellow color is you guys. That yellow color is the Central Valley region. And so you can see there are 7 churches roughly in there, and some of them is some overlap there, but there are roughly 7 churches in the Central Valley region, and out of that, there are 4 English-speaking churches or non-Hispanic churches, and so that's who we've invited to be part of this weekend experience with us. And so I'm just curious, how many of you have seen this flyer, this handout that's gone around? Okay. I'm seeing a number of hands. If you didn't get this, there are some, from what I'm understanding, there are some of these out in the foyer where you can grab one, and it has the full breakdown for the weekend, but you can see it there as well. We are here tonight, and then tomorrow morning and afternoon, we will be diving deeper into some more topics, and we're excited about that and hope that you plan to join us for all of that. Okay, very good. So the first topic that we're looking at this weekend is the topic of discovering the needs of your community. How can you discover the needs of your community? This is such an important question because, the book of James says that we ought to be quick to hear but slow to speak, right? And so when we look at evangelism, when we look at sharing Jesus with our communities, do we take the time to listen to what their needs are? Do we take the time to discover what it is that they are really struggling with and needing? And sometimes churches, and I've seen this as a pastor myself, sometimes churches will try to reach their community, but don't first take the time to listen and discover what the needs are, and then there can be some frustration and even some discouragement when success isn't discovered through that process. And so this is a really important step, to take the time to listen to the community and discover their needs. And so there's a tool that we'll be sharing with you tonight called Percept Demographic Data that will hopefully help you to better listen and to better understand what it is that your community needs and is struggling with and is interested in. So we hope that that will be a blessing for you. But before we dive into that, I want to share with you some context as to how this really and why this really matters. And so that's what you see up here on the screen, is this concept of an evangelism cycle. Maybe you've heard of this concept of an evangelism cycle before. This is a model of evangelism that I believe in, we all believe in, and I found this to be tremendously effective in my own pastoral ministry, and so we are basically systematizing this so that all of our churches can benefit from this powerful model of evangelism. And so we have broken this evangelism cycle up into 6 different phases, and these 6 phases are actually broken up into 3 pairs of 2 that rhyme to make it easier for you to remember. So the first set of 2 is revitalize, fertilize. Then you have sow, grow, and then reap, keep. Do you think you can remember that? Revitalize, fertilize, sow, grow, reap, keep. Well, what does that mean? I'm going to give you a quick overview, and then I will be diving into this more tomorrow morning here during the church service time together. But the first phase is the revitalize phase, and that is basically the church really taking time to connect with Jesus and to seek him and to experience revival. It's a very simple concept that you cannot share what you don't have, right? And so if we want to be sharing Jesus, we must first make sure that we are seeking Jesus for ourselves as individuals and as a church. And so that's what that first phase is all about, making sure that we are alive and on fire for Jesus. And so many times when we do evangelism, we miss this first step. And we rush off to do evangelism, and then again, we may not have success, and we wonder why that is. I've worked with churches that, do evangelism, and then, as new believers come into the church, they don't stick around, unfortunately. And one of the reasons why is because the church is not on fire for Jesus. And so I believe that if we are all on fire for Jesus, if we all have a daily personal walk with Jesus, if our hearts are revived and on fire for him, as new believers come into the faith, they will meet Jesus in every one of us as they get to become part of our community. And so that's a powerful concept. The next phase is the fertilize phase, which is really about blessing others. It's really about giving value to the community. And again, I'll go through this more tomorrow, but just going to give you a quick overview. The sow phase is about building relationships or friendships around the value that we have to offer to the community. Then the grow phase is about nurturing spirituality, so bringing spiritual conversations around those friendships that are being nurtured around the value. And then the 5th phase is the one that we're perhaps the most familiar with, and that is the reaping phase, where we invite people to follow Jesus. We invite people to take a next step on their spiritual journey. And then the final 6th phase is the keep phase, and that is where once people make a decision for Jesus, that's really just the beginning, isn't it, of their journey. And so we want to make sure that we are establishing those new believers into faith and into community. And so that's the evangelism cycle in a nutshell. And like I said, we'll be looking at that more later. But for now, the question is, and this is the reason I shared that with you, is where does this presentation and where does this Percept demographic data fit into that bigger picture of an evangelism cycle? And it fits in that second phase, the fertilize phase, and that is blessing others. And so the big question tonight that we're wanting each of you to wrestle with, and for you to wrestle as a church together, is the question of how can we serve and bless our community? What value can we give to our community to reach them the way that Jesus likes to reach people? And if you look throughout the Gospels at the example of Jesus, it's very powerful how he reached people. You can see he had a healing ministry, a teaching ministry, and a preaching ministry. Those were the 3 aspects of Jesus' ministry. He gave value to them. He built relationships with people, and he also preached about spiritual topics as well. One of my favorite quotes from the book Desire of Ages is this one right here that says, talking about Jesus, from his earliest years, he was possessed of how many purposes? One purpose. What was that one purpose? He lived to bless others. Isn't that powerful? And I say, well, if that was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. Amen? And so I believe that God has called us to live like Jesus, to live to bless others. And so we must have that clear in our minds. How can we bless others? How can we give value to our community in the most meaningful way possible? As I was referring to earlier, sometimes as churches we will try to meet, we try to give value to our community without first really listening to what they need. And so we end up scratching where they're not itching, so to speak. And so we believe that there is a lot of power in taking the time to go through this journey of learning what it is that the community really needs. Where are they itching, and how can we scratch that itch? How can we really meet them where they need it the most? And so I believe that when a church can discover the needs of their community and then find how they can meet those needs based on their own resources and passions and that kind of a thing, that's where the church can gain a lot of traction in the community. I've seen that time and time again as a pastor. I've seen that in the churches that I've had the privilege of serving, and I've seen it in so many other churches, even here in the Oregon Conference, as we've been working with many different churches. Churches that really take this journey really are effective at reaching their communities. And so how can we discover the needs of the community? Here are a few ideas, and I'm wondering if, Andy, if you might want to share some ideas about this too. But one of the ways is through this Percept demographic data. And so that's a tool that we are going to be going over tonight. And so that's one way. What are some other ways that we can discover the needs of our community, Andy?
Yeah, so community surveys, and I really appreciate just what Tim is saying about being able to listen to our community. I think this topic of discovering the needs of the community usually goes hand in hand with the question, what the community wants. What does our community want? Someone shared this thought with me about, think about this, for, to, in, and with, when relating to what the community wants. Oftentimes, we don't listen to what our community wants, right? And so we usually do something for them, and oftentimes when we do something for them, it's probably something different than what actually the community wants. So we could, maybe offend the community, or we're just really not missing what the real need is. And I could cover what the other ones mean, but they're very similar. Something that I'm going to invite you to come in tomorrow afternoon as well, and I'm going to cover a little bit more about the community surveys and visiting with other community leaders. But something really powerful, a great resource that we have is Ministry Match. Now, this tool is really neat because we can look at each one of your churches and see what kind of services for community services are you already doing, and looking at the community, is that what they're looking for in a church? So that's really important to understand. So community surveys. Also, we have, I'll share with you this windshield survey. It's pretty much going around your neighborhood and just kind of assessing what you're seeing, just taking it for face value. So those are some really neat resources. And the last one about community leaders, I'm super big advocate for that. Those are the people that we really want to connect with, in the city of Corvallis, Albany, Sweet Home, and there's another church, Lebanon. Yeah, Sweet Lebanon. And so, it's really important to just make sure that we connect with our key civic leaders in the community. And so I have some questions that you guys will be able to use to take home, make appointments, and start asking those leaders what you can be doing as a faith-based organization to help.
Excellent. And so Andy's going to be sharing more about all of this with you tomorrow afternoon, and so you don't want to miss it. Please plan to join us for that. And so one of the key concepts I don't want you to miss about this slide is that there should be, in my opinion, multiple points of data for you to really listen to the community. And so in churches I've worked with, sometimes all they have is one data point at most as to what the community really needs. But it's always best if we have multiple data points. And so what we're sharing with you tonight through the Percept demographic data is one, I believe, potentially really powerful data point, but it's also good for you to not just look at this data, but to also be having other ways you can be listening to your community too, whether that's through doing some community surveys, especially in the homes immediately surrounding your church, or as Andy was sharing, visiting with other community leaders. This is something that I have done as in my own pastoral ministry as well, connecting, maybe it's with the mayor or with the local, police department or local law enforcement, whatever it might be, and getting their insights as to what they see as needs in the community as well. So there are many different ways to do that. And as we take the time to look at different data points and compare them with one another, we will begin to see a story and a picture emerge. And the more we do that, the more accurate of a sense we will get as to what our community might be struggling with. This is a quote that I really like from the book Evangelism, and it says that we are to study the field carefully and are not to think that we must follow the same methods in every place. Whatever may have been your former practice, it is not necessary to repeat it again and again in the same way. God would have new and untried methods followed. Amen? And I share this with you because sometimes we as churches can get stuck in a rut, can't we? Where we say, well, this is what we do as a church. And if you really ask, well, why do we do this as a church? Sometimes you might get some answers along the lines of, well, this is what we do because it's what we've always done. Have you ever heard that before, or maybe something kind of like that? And so we want to challenge you, sometimes what a church is doing is great. Other times it might be worth taking a look at if there's something else the church can be doing that is maybe a new and untried method that is really worth our time and effort to consider as we seek to reach our community with God's love. So now we're transitioning. Now that you have that context and that kind of that big picture view of really listening to the community and ways that you can do that, we're going to be looking now at this tool of the Percept demographic data. And so these are the 4 churches that we have invited to be part of this weekend. Of course, the Corvallis church here is the main one, but there's also Albany. And I'm curious, just by a show of hands, how many of you here are part of the Corvallis church? You can just raise your hand. Okay. All right, most of the hands, which is, of course, what we've expected. How about Albany? How many of you are here from Albany? Okay, Ethan, awesome. Glad you're here, representing, awesome. And I know Albany's kind of been on a journey already, but we appreciate you joining us this weekend. Okay, how about Lebanon? Anybody here from Lebanon? Oh, awesome. Okay, some hands here. And how about Sweet Home? Anyone from Sweet Home? Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming. I'm really thankful that you're here and glad that there is at least one person from each church to represent. And our hope and desire is that you will be an ambassador in taking this information to your church and to share it with them. And so we appreciate you doing that. So as we look at the data here in just a moment, you'll start to notice some trends, and you'll start to notice, again, a picture that begins to emerge. And as you look at this data, we want you to know that it is with this definition. And so we've reached out to the pastors. Our team has reached out to the pastors of each of these churches before this weekend and have asked them, what area would you like us to run the data on? And so this Percept demographic tool allows us to run the data based on either zip codes or based on a set mile radius around the church. And so the Corvallis church, Pastor Jonathan asked us to run the data based on a 7-mile radius around the church. And so that radius ended up being a population of 77,117 individuals. So keep that in mind as we look at the data. This is who we're looking at. When it comes to Albany, we did 2 zip codes, which came out to a population of 68,000. For Lebanon, we did 1 zip code, which came out to 32,000. And then Sweet Home, we did 2 zip codes, and that came out to 15,000. So again, this is what we're looking at to give you that context for these next slides. Okay, and I'm going to have Rob help us with these binders that we have. We have binders that has this data in it, and we're going to be leaving this with you so that you can go through it. There's a lot of information in this tool and in this data. And so tonight, of course, we don't have the time to go through everything, but we have highlighted a few pieces that you might want to know about. And so there are 3 things that you'll find in these binders, and you'll want to share what's in here with those that are from your church. Of course, the Corvallis church might be a little bit of a challenge since there are more of you here, but I'm sure you guys will be creative in how you disperse the data. Maybe make sure that it gets to especially the leadership of the church. And so the first document you'll see there, well, it's actually on the rightmost document, is called the source book. And so the source book is the biggest one. That's why we've only printed one of them, because they're big. It's like a manual. And that basically explains where the data comes from. So especially if you're an analytical personality and you're wanting to know, where does this information come from? How is this information collected? That is your resource for understanding that, the source book. Okay, so the source book does not have anything specific to your area in it necessarily. The source book just tells you how the data is collected, how it's received, and where it comes from. The second tool you'll see is the middle one on the screen here, and that's called the Ministry Area Profile. And that actually has 2 things in it, the Ministry Area Profile and it's called Compass as well. So it's kind of merged together as one. And we've printed, I believe it's about 2 or 3 of those. And so that is a bit of a more detailed breakdown of the data, and so we encourage you to, again, make sure that gets to some key leaders, to the pastor, and to maybe some elders or personal ministries leaders, whoever really is going to be most involved with looking at this information. And we do have digital copies of these documents available as well, and so if you want a digital copy, reach out to your pastor, and we will get that to you. And then the third document is First View. And the First View is a kind of a smaller summary or synopsis of all of the information. And we've printed about a dozen, I believe it is, of those. And so that is more for broad distribution. Hopefully there's enough for most, if not every one of you, to get at least one of the first few documents. And again, that's kind of a summary of the data and the information. All right. Any questions about that so far? I know it's kind of a lot to handle. But, okay, very good. Awesome. So now that you know a little bit about what these documents are, we're going to be looking at them a little bit closer. So there are 3 sources of data for this information. One is the U.S. Census Bureau. There's something called Claritas Marketing Research, and then the Ethos Survey Series. And so, again, the source book that you have there, the one on the right-hand side, that will go into that information in more depth if you're interested in the sources of this data more thoroughly. But for the sake of time, tonight we are just going to be highlighting 4 key pieces of information in these documents. We're going to be looking at the ethnicity report. We're going to be looking at religious preference, the concerns of the community, and the interests of the community. So that's what we're going to do, and we've divided it up per church. So first we're looking at the ethnicity report, and so this is for Corvallis. You can see this is what it looks like, and it will show you there the reference to that. So here, this is map page 2. So that's the ministry area profile page 2. So if you're looking for that in your documents, you can find it there. So this is the ethnic breakdown. Okay, we're going to play musical microphones tonight. Okay, can you hear me now? Good. All right, so for the sake of time, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but if there's anything in particular you're really wanting, you can stop me to look at that, or maybe you can take some pictures of it as well. So this is Corvallis. The next one is Albany. So that's what the ethnic breakdown of Albany looks like. Then the next one is Lebanon. And then finally you have Sweet Home. So I noticed a trend, and maybe you noticed this too as you looked at this, and that is so this is in order, I have this in order: Corvallis, Albany, Lebanon, and Sweet Home. And so this is in order of, from a largest sample size or largest group population to smallest population. And so you'll notice one thing, and that is that the smaller the population area, as you go through the church communities, you'll see that the less diverse it is, right? Or you see the wider Caucasian population, it grows. So we see first 76, then 79, 86, and then 89%. So that's just an interesting thing to consider. Okay, so now that we looked a little bit about what the ethnic breakdown looks like in our communities, the next highlight is the religious preference indicator. So you'll want to notice on these slides, these slides are a little bit different than what you'll see in the actual data because we have tried to visualize it in a meaningful way for you. So these slides, you'll notice, are relative to the national average. So what does that mean exactly? That means, so for example, in Corvallis, you see here a big one is that the Mormon faith, or the Church of Latter-day Saints, is, you see 455%. What does that mean? That means that in the Corvallis area, in that 7-mile radius around the church, the religious preference, as indicated in this data, shows that there is a 455% higher religious preference for Mormonism compared to the national average. Does that make sense? So very fascinating, isn't that? So that's what we see here for Corvallis, and you'll start to see trends, and we've seen this even as we've looked at this data for other areas as well. So 455% higher Mormonism, New Age 91% higher compared to the national average, and it goes from there. Again, you notice some trends here. Look at this. Albany, 468% higher Mormon preference, but look at the New Age as well. That's amazing, isn't it? 465% higher in the Albany area compared to the national average. Very fascinating. Okay, now moving on to Lebanon. Again, Mormonism is a trend that we're seeing here, much higher in this region here compared to the national average, as well as New Age. And Sweet Home, you see, is very similar that way. So, very interesting to look at these trends. Okay, now we're moving on to the concerns. So what are the concerns of the community that they've voiced? So looking at Corvallis, you'll notice that the number one thing that popped up in this data is achieving educational objectives. 60% higher concern about this in the Corvallis area compared to the national average. So one of the reasons that we've chosen to visualize the data this way is because as you're looking at all the information, one of the big questions is, well, what makes our area different, right? What makes us stand out? What makes us unique compared to the rest of the nation? And so that's why we have chosen to visualize it this way. So in the Corvallis area, achieving educational objectives, 60% higher concern compared to the national average. And then finding a satisfying job or career, 23% higher. Dealing with social injustice, 21% higher. Achieving a fulfilling marriage, 19% higher than the national average. Developing parenting skills. So if you're from Corvallis, I would encourage you to, especially if you're interested in this, to maybe take a picture of this slide. We can try to make it available to you as well later. But we're going to be breaking you guys up into some discussion time here in just a few moments. And so we want to make sure that you remember this information for your discussion time. So I encourage you to maybe snap a picture of it if you have a smartphone with you, and then you can use that, reference that when it's time for the discussion time to come back and looking at that. And so as we look at this data, again, you'll start to see a story, a picture emerge of your community and what they're concerned about as well. So, okay, so that's Corvallis. Are we ready to move on to the next church? Okay. Next we have Albany. So again, you'll see a little bit of similarities between Albany and the Corvallis region where, we saw in Corvallis 60% higher with achieving educational objectives, and Albany 75% higher than the national average with achieving educational objectives. 45% higher for finding childcare, 44% higher than the national average for achieving a fulfilling marriage, finding spiritual teaching, finding life direction, finding employment opportunities, dealing with divorce. These are some other concerns that are higher than the national average for the Albany area. Then we have Lebanon. So for Lebanon, dealing with neighborhood gangs popped up as 33% higher than the national average. That was interesting. And then providing adequate food, 27% higher. Dealing with divorce, dealing with abusive relationships, finding spiritual teaching, day-to-day financial worries, dealing with alcohol or drug abuse, teen child problems, finding a good church, health insurance. These are some of the things that are higher than the national average in terms of what the community is concerned about in the Lebanon area. Okay, and then the last one is the Sweet Home Church. So again, you'll notice some similarities between the Sweet Home and the Lebanon areas. Dealing with neighborhood gangs, 51% higher than the national average. And then providing adequate food, spiritual teaching, abusive relationships, dealing with divorce, day-to-day financial worries, finding a good church, dealing with teen child problems, drug, alcohol abuse, affordable housing. These are all concerns that the data shows is higher than the national average for the community around Sweet Home. So, a lot of interesting pieces of information to process, aren't there? So what we would like for you to do now is to get into groups. I don't know if, Rob, if you want to kind of explain how this is going to work, but we want you to get into groups and discuss this a bit.
Yeah, if we could have, I know there's a big contingent of Corvallis here. Is this whole section here all Corvallis? Can you all gather into a group and basically all of the churches gather into groups and just answer this question? How can your church address these pain points? You just saw a whole list of issues in your area that is higher than the national average. These are big time opportunities for your church in your area. Maybe ask yourselves, what are the ministries that are going on in the church right now that are meeting these needs? And maybe think about what is another way that we can address some of those pain points that were up there. Were there any surprises on that chart that stood out to you? And just to kind of dialogue and work through some of these. Is it possible to put up some of those slides again if somebody needs to take a picture of it? Does anybody need a picture of any of those slides again? Just let us know. We'll be coming around. But so Corvallis, if you can meet over here in this area, Lebanon, I guess over here in this area, Sweet Home, is that, you guys don't have to move because you're right there and you're together, and also Albany as well. So yeah, get into your groups now and have a great discussion answering the question on the screen as you see it.
Yeah, and if you're here by yourself or in a small group, feel free to team up with others if you like. So let's take about 5 minutes or so. All right, let's take one more minute and wrap up the conversation, then we'll come back together.
Fine. So I see the spiritual thinking. Yeah. Yeah. Like Tim said, it's through there. I see that. Yeah. Just what then that evangelistic meaning is. What spiritual form are you looking for? Bible study guides. Room with our attendees. Yes, right. I'm friends with him, my congregation. But he has Bible studies where he just takes the scriptures and people will sit down and we'll just read and then talk about it. Where, just having the verses makes the interaction. Yeah. No, and so I'm thinking, okay, are these people looking for more? What is the spiritual? Have a look in the book and
Yeah. All right, let us come back together here and let's just take a moment. So the next slides that I'm going to share with you is the last piece we're looking at tonight in the data, and that is what your community said that they were interested in. So it would be really curious to see how that matches with some of your ideas. But before we do that, I'm wondering if maybe there's just a quick synopsis maybe that you might want to share, that something that emerged from your conversation. Does anybody want to just give a quick idea, just in a sentence or two, as to what it is that you guys were talking about and looking at? Anyone? Did anything come out of your conversation that was valuable for you as a team or as a church? I heard a lot of good conversations, so I know there were some good things being talked about. Okay. Gear up. Okay. Very good. Awesome. Anyone else? Don't all speak at once now. Okay, yes?
We were discussing about what are some of the ways to retain youth. Since you know, our churches in Lebanon, Albany, and Sweet Home, most of our church members are older, and we are faced with a very serious realization that if we don't retain or somehow find a way to bring back our youths to church, especially after this COVID, we have lost most of our youths, and then we are in a serious problem, because we need, like when we were trying to answer that question about the food we saw on the graph there, most of our church members that were involved in the food, what you call that, Judy? The soup kitchen.
Sure.
They cannot do that because they cannot stand anymore because they are older now. And we need young people. So we were, just trying to wrestle with what are the ways in which we can retain or bring back our youths. And we were talking about how in most Adventist churches today, a lot of are trying to appeal to youth through music and all that, praise and worship, which is, I brought up a point when you focus too much on music, at some point it'll become entertainment. And he mentioned that the world provides a better form of entertainment than doing that. So we in the church, we have to be authentic in how we feed our church members, especially the youth, because they are smart. When they come to the church, they will know if the church is feeding the right spiritual food. When you're young, you have a lot of questions. And when you don't find that question answered in the church, you go and find it somewhere. Or you just forget about, leave that question out, and you just go, leave.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we
Very
were
good.
discussing about that.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. Excellent. Yeah, what I appreciate about what you're sharing is that you guys also started having the conversation of, what resources do we need as a church to try to meet the needs of the community? And part of that conversation is we need to make sure we're engaging young people as well. So thank you for sharing that. Excellent. Was there one more maybe that anybody that wanted to share? Don't want to give. I want to make sure you have the opportunity if you really wanted to share something. Okay. If not, that's all right too. Very good. One other comment I wanted to make is that as you're looking at this data, don't necessarily look at this data as the for sure answer to everything, but rather look at it as one piece in your conversation. So for example, there was one comment that was made as we were mingling with you all, and that is on the topic of finding spiritual teaching, I think it was. What does that mean for the community? Well, that's a great question to have, not only with among yourselves, but with other community leaders. And so maybe you can use some of this data, again, as not the end of your journey, but maybe as the beginning of a journey to have these conversations with some community leaders, and even maybe in a community survey or in conversations with people in the community, and ask them, based on your awareness of the community, what kind of spiritual teaching do you think that they're looking for? And so again, this is all part of a bigger conversation that you can be having. So very good. All right, are you ready to look at what the community said they were interested in? Awesome. All right, so for Corvallis, sports or camping came up as at the top, 63% higher interest in sports or camping compared to the national average. So that was an interesting one. And then cultural programs, marriage enrichment opportunities, parent training programs, and adult theological discussion groups are all the top 5 interests that the community expressed there compare above the national average. So that was for the Corvallis area. Okay, are we ready to move on to the next church? I want to make sure that you guys all have the photos that you want from here. Okay, the next one is Albany. So interestingly enough, sports or camping also popped up as number 1 there, 58% higher than the national average. And I'm just curious, is that surprising to you? Is that something that you knew already? Does that match with what you thought of your community? Yes, okay, very good. Okay, so daycare services also 40% higher than the national average for Albany. Marriage enrichment opportunities, family activities and outings, and divorce recovery. So these are all interests that your community has expressed for Albany. Okay, how about Lebanon? Bible study discussions and prayer groups, 18% higher than the national average. Parent training programs, 14% higher. Sports or camping, again, we're seeing that one on all of these, aren't we? Marriage enrichment opportunities, youth social programs. These are all higher than the national average for the Lebanon area. And finally, Sweet Home, again, some similarities here between these last two. Bible study discussion and prayer groups, parent training programs, sports or camping, youth social programs, and marriage enrichment opportunities, all above the national average for the Sweet Home area as well. So if you can do something about, something sports or camping related, apparently you'll be able to reach everybody, or many, I should say, in this area. So again, these are pieces of your discussion to have. And I think that's really important because sometimes we say, well, we're passionate about this kind of a ministry, and so that's what we're going to offer our community. And so I would challenge you as you have these conversations, as you're brainstorming ideas, to keep coming back to that question of how does this offering that our church is considering, what need is that meeting in the community, and is that a need the community is telling us that they are interested in having met? So that's really key, which leads to this point again of finding a match with what the community needs and what the church has to offer. And I've seen some really powerful things happen when this match is found between the church and the community. So, for example, discover the resources of the church. How can you do that? Look at things and talk about things amongst yourselves, such as, what are the spiritual gifts of the different church members and the leaders of our church? How about the talents and passions that God has gifted each of us as a community and as a body of Christ? How about the experience that we have and the calling that God has placed on our hearts and our lives? And so as you begin to look at these things, if you can find a overlap between these things and what the community needs, then you have struck gold. And I can tell you, we have seen some very exciting things happen when you can find that in the community. And so I wish we had more time to tell you about this, but there's a church that you can go online. It's an Adventist church. It's called Church in the Valley, and they're based in the Aldergrove, Canada, British Columbia, Canada area. And have any of you heard about what they're doing? Okay, we have a few people that know about it already. They started something called AOK Ministries, stands for Acts of Kindness Ministries, and they did exactly what I was just telling you. They looked at what the community needs, they looked at what they have to offer. They found that there was a need for, with homes that were in disrepair, and they found that in their church, they had some contractors and some people that were good with renovations of homes, and so they matched it. And so they said, well, that's what we're going to offer our community, and there's some really powerful testimonies you can find on their website and on YouTube of families and homes that were really reached by the power of the gospel through these ministries of meeting the needs of the community. They also did things like a single mom's oil change, and you can even finding vehicles for single moms that didn't have vehicles. And so there are a number of different ways that you can do that. And I'm not saying that you have to do those things necessarily. I'm saying, have a similar conversation, go through a similar journey. And if you can find that match, then there's so much potential there for you and for your church. And they have these testimony videos where they're literally interviewing people from the community that are saying, we have joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church because of what they have done for us through this ministry. And so baptisms are coming out of this ministry. People are giving their lives to Jesus as a result of these ministries. And so don't underestimate the power of meeting the needs of your community. That's really a way that you can share that you love them. And so that's very powerful. So I don't think we have time tonight to really talk about it, but I want you to be thinking about this and chewing on this because tomorrow afternoon we'll have some more time to talk about it. So, be thinking about this tonight and tomorrow morning. What does your church have to offer? What gifts does your church have that can be used to meet the needs that you are seeing or hearing about in your community? And who has these gifts and how can they be used? How can you empower the people in your church that have the gifts and the talents and the passions to meet those needs that your community has? So again, this is all part of that conversation about what meaningful value can we give to our community. And so just as a way of a reminder, as we wrap up for tonight, that, Christ's method of pre-work, Christ's method of reaching people is that he offered value with no strings attached. Then he also, he related to people. He built relationships. He talked about spiritual things, and he invited people to follow him. And so this is the example that we are called to follow. And an important step in that is discovering how we can effectively give value to our communities with no strings attached. So are there any questions or comments before we wrap up for tonight? Yes, I'm seeing a hand back there. Okay, the question is, where do we get the statistics for that? Yeah, that's a great question. So every church here was given a binder, and in that binder is a big kind of a manual. It's called a source document, and a source book, and that will explain all the different ways that the data was collected. But it's through like surveys and the U.S. Census Bureau and different ways that have interacted with the community to ask them these things. So excellent question. All right. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a great question. So my understanding is that those are some Hispanic churches. Yeah, so I can get you the names if you're interested in knowing exactly what they are. But yeah, they weren't included in this because they're, our department mainly serves the non-Hispanic churches. So great question. Okay, very good. All right, well, thank you again so much. Unless you gentlemen have anything else to add, thank you again so much for joining us tonight. We, again, want to invite you to come back tomorrow. This is the schedule for tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, Rob is going to be sharing for Sabbath School about how to have spiritual conversations with secular people. Do you want to give us a quick idea of what we'll be talking about tomorrow morning for that?
Yeah, I'm going to be sharing some interesting information about how to approach secular people, the unchurched. It's a growing population in our world, and it's really tough sometimes to have spiritual conversations. It's kind of awkward. You want to talk to them about God, but you don't really know how to do it. We're going to be exploring some of those methods tomorrow morning. So what time are we starting? We're starting at 10 a.m. right here. You don't want to miss it. We're going to be spending an hour just talking about that.
Very good. Thank you, Rob. And then for the Divine Hour, we're going to be I will be sharing about how we can embrace a culture of evangelism as individuals and as a church. What does that look like? How can you change culture of a church and how to do that? It'll be really exciting to look at that together. And then, of course, there is lunch that will be provided here. And then in the afternoon, Rob, what are you going to be sharing with us after lunch?
Yeah, I think COVID presented with us an opportunity. And it's an opportunity that really was always there. Online ministry was always there. What I think COVID did was accelerated it. And I think it would have been great if our church was at the forefront and ready for it, but in many ways, it caught us all off guard. And we're kind of playing catch up. So what I would like to talk to you guys about tomorrow is coming up with an intentional plan on how to start an online ministry that goes beyond just posting your Sabbath morning services. We're going to be talking about choosing the right audience, choosing the right platforms. There's a lot of social platforms out there. And then also choosing the right content. I will be sharing with you a number of incredible resources that will help you in your churches and your ministry online. You don't want to miss it. That's happening between 2 and 3 o'clock, I think, tomorrow. So we're talking about online ministry, effective online ministry.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Rob. And then Andy will be taking it there starting at 3 o'clock. And he shared already with us some. Is there anything else you want to add to what you're going to be sharing? No. Okay, so he already gave you an idea a few moments ago what he'll be talking about. And then we will wrap it up at 4 o'clock, putting it all together. How can we put everything we've been learning together? And we'll be having some interaction and some time for questions and things like that. So you don't want to miss it. So again, thank you for coming, and we're looking forward to continuing this journey with you tomorrow.